Good evening, Moray Rabotai. Bruchim Habayim to another edition of our Mesillat Yesharim Weekly. We are on Perek Dalit of Mesillat Yesharim, B'derech Kniyat HaZehirut, in the ways to acquire being careful in mindfulness, and says the Mesillat Yesharim. I'm just going to give a quick review of the beginning of this chapter until where we are holding. Mesillat Yesharim wrote that, of course, the Braita of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who the entire Mesillat Yesharim is built upon that sentence, starts from Torah Mevia Lidei Zehirut. The chain of command, the ladder of growth, starts from Torah Mevia Lidei Zehirut, studying Torah, learning, and being constantly on a reminding yourself mode. That's really what starts everything and accomplishes. We mentioned the Gemara in Eruvin, that if you give the Gemara says there was a debate back and forth. Is learning Torah more important, studying more important, or doing of the mitzvah, doing the commandments more important? Because of course you're learning in order to be able to do. So doing is more important, but learning is very important too, because, and the Gemara says after over 2 years, Nimru Begamru, the decision, the conclusion was, Gadol Talmud shemevia lidei maaseh. Learning is more important because that's the only thing that guarantees that you would do. But a person is constantly learning, you're constantly reminded, you're constantly growing. But says the Mesillat Yesharim, that's not enough. You also have to be thinking. You have to, first of all, learn the right things that inspire a person to want to be better. And you have to spend time actually thinking, spending time with yourself, trying to bring down from our mindset an intellectual conviction to the heart, to the feeling, to the actions, to make the knowledge to a reality. And said the Mesillat Yesharim, this is 3 different groups of people. They deal with this differently. The highly intellectual, the regular, smart, intellectual people, and then the rest of the people, regular people. So very highly intellectual people are people who don't want to be missing any opportunity. If you could get 100%, why wouldn't you? And when realizing that 100%, you're talking about 100% of infinity, forever and ever. You will never want to miss that, because every little bit that you will be missing, you're missing that for eternity. It's not just like, your Airbnb for 2 nights is going to be a little bit less fancy. But you're talking about real estate for the real estate. The only real estate. It's going to be forever. So you're not going to want to miss anything that's possible for you to get. If you could get X, you want 100% of X. Then they're one level lower, still highly intellectual, but one level lower is that, but with comparison with other people. You would never want to be less than other people. Like even in finite world, we don't want to be less than other people. Even in things, dvarim shel mabekach, things are not really that important, right? The level of happiness is not necessarily related to how much assets and money you have. Assets and money give you comfort. They give you power. And whoever denies that is jealous, right? It's good, a certain amount of it. But it does not give you happiness necessarily. Some of the most miserable people are the higher echelon of the community. And you don't have to look far. A regular basic research in 5 seconds, you'll see that the level of depression in the higher echelon of the community is visibly higher than the regular middle class. The attempted suicide and the actual suicide is much higher in those communities. So certainly happiness is not measured. And yet we have so much jealousy, so much coveting. We don't want to be, because we don't want to see ourselves less. We want to be up to par, like living up to the Jones and the Kardashians, and you want to be in the physical world. You want to be the top. You want to be not less than other people, that's for sure. And you burn when you see someone else that was lower than you. Imagine someone that you would say, this guy, forget about him. Now imagine he makes it, and he makes it bigger than you. How do you feel every time you see them? And that's in a finite world, in things that don't really necessarily serve as the criteria of happiness and success in the world. Now imagine for eternity, imagine for something that really matters. So that's the second. Now the third one, which is for the most people, for the regular commoner. Regular people, says the Mesillat Yesharim, this is the third category. It's on page 77, I believe he said, in the English art scroll. Mine is in Memvav. Says the Gemara, says the Mesillat Yesharim, the awakening for most of the people, for the majority of the laymen, the commoners, is going to be the following, and this is really powerful. Says the Mesillat Yesharim, is pondering and thinking about the consequences of a person's action. For a believer, for a person that believes God created the world, and he watches over the world, is not a hefker world. This is not just God created it and left it to chance and happenstance. It's not what we would call an intellectual design, that the intellect behind it does not care about the design. We believe with Schar Audish, the 13 principles of faith, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about His world, cares about us, and there is consequences for the choices that you make. Just like the realities of gravity, I know that if I drop this, it's going to fall because there's gravity, and the higher I pick it up, and the heavier it is, and the smaller the point of contact, the more pressure, and those are just physics. You can calculate the variables and exactly, with precisely, foresee what's going to happen when it happens, because there are rules of nature. And spiritual world also has rules and regulations. There are consequences when you choose something. There's going to be follow-up consequence for good and for bad. So it says in Mesillat Yesharim, Birot Omek Hadin, when you watch the depth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's judgment, Ad Hechan Magia, how carefully it's measured, how precise it is. Asher be'emet ra'ui le'izdazeah, that the person that ponders to it really would tremble. Ulitcharet tamid, you'll be always in constant state of not fear in a negative way, but fear in a positive way, in a good way, that you are mindful. Every moment, everything that you do, imagine for yourself, if you are handling something, they tell you to take this from point A to point B. So you're about and prepared to take it. And they tell you, by the way, this is a nuclear reactor thing. If you tip it a little bit, the world is going to go haywire. So how do you carry it then? Every movement counts. Every little tilt, every little tip. And there was this fellow in the 47th Street, in the Diamond District, and someone brought him a very large diamond, and he had like a little dot inside of it. It had to be fixed, but usually you do that. It's a fairly simple thing for people who deal with these things on a daily basis. But this was such a large diamond that what was at stake was tremendous. You would make one little wrong move, would crack the stone, and there went your investment, thousands of dollars. But if you did it correctly, it would be worth 10 times more. So it was really a kedai investment, but no one wanted to take the chance, because they would know that the person sitting there with the machine knows that he's dealing with a potential, $2-3 million stone. And they're going to be trembling, and they're going to crack it and ruin it. So no one wanted to buy it. This guy was very smart. He bought it. So he goes to somebody that has been working only for 2 weeks for him, He doesn't really understand the prices of things, the value of things, and very nonchalantly drops it in front of him and says, I need this in 3 minutes, or I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. Says, can you do this and quickly give it back to me? Very nonchalantly. Doesn't tell him, be careful, doesn't tell him anything. Because he didn't want him to be concerned. And the guy says, sure, no problem. He puts it there, and gives it back to him. When you don't realize what you're dealing with, you won't necessarily be concerned. When a person knows what it is that they're dealing with, that's a whole different story. And pondering it, it's going to go through a list of things that are important. When you know that you're dealing with eternity, then you're going to be much more careful in the way you are going to view it and in the way you're going to handle yourself through that. So says the Mesillat Yesharim, who's going to withstand the scrutiny of the proper judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Says Mesillat Yesharim. And really, David HaMelech himself would say, do not bring your servant to judgment, because if you want to judge, like judgment judge, nobody would come out standing straight. If Hashem wants to scrutinize things, it's going to be very difficult. We know what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu when Hashem wanted to scrutinize him, with Avraham Avinu, with all of those. And he's going to go through some examples. Maybe we'll give some more examples. Hashem's providence and proper hashkafa is on everything. Like the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Ayin ro'ah, ozen shomat, v'kol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtav. An eye that sees, ear that hears everything, and all of what you do is written. Everything is recorded. Can you imagine? Now we could understand this a little bit more, because everything that you do is recorded somewhere, right? And you can understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by Hashem, it also has the thought bubbles. What you think also is recorded. And all of that is there, it's going to stay. To the degree that someone said, what the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be, Hashem brings the scenarios to yourself and you comment on them. You comment on it. David HaMelech, the Gemara says, Kol ha'omer David chata ela to'eh. Right? The Gemara talks about this in Mesillat of Zion, many other places. That David HaMelech was a tremendous person. Technically speaking, what he did was, on paper, all check, was okay. Bathsheba was divorced already. Uriah Hitti was chayav mita because of an account of disrespect to the king. David HaMelech saw Bathsheba to be his real Batzuk, which was, right? The Midrash says, the Zohar HaKadosh, that Bathsheba was meant to be for David HaMelech. Actually, Midrash says that Uriah Hitti, who was the husband of the original husband of Bathsheba, was a Hitti. He was a non-Jew. And when David killed Goliath, who was also a Hitti, he was the Noseh Kelav. Uriah was the person carrying, he was the right-hand man of Goliath. And when he killed Goliath, he needed some help. And he asked David HaMelech for help. David HaMelech wanted to chop off the head after he had killed him, to show, because pikuach nefesh, whatever it was, and for them to run away and end the war. And he promised him, he said, promise me a Bat Yisrael, a Jewish girl, and I will help you. And he promised him, and the Midrash says that was wrong of David HaMelech the Benot Yisrael are hefker, that you promised, even though that it was halachically maybe okay, because Midrash says it's pikuach nefesh. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I'll give your Batzuk to him. Bathsheba was the Batzuk of David HaMelech. He saw Beruach HaKodesh when he saw her, that Mashiach is going to come from the lineage of kingship is going to become from him. And that was correct. Shlomo HaMelech was the son of Bathsheba. And of course, he was called Yedidiah. He was beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, it would not come from a union that was not proper. Of course. So what David HaMelech did on paper was all checked. But yet, David HaMelech was admonished by HaKadosh Baruch Hu tremendously for what he did. Tremendously. He lost 4 of his children because of that. He spent the rest of his life doing tshuva. He was, embarrassed publicly. So many things. But David HaMelech was correct. But was expected more from him. If Hashem wants to judge, David HaMelech himself says, Ki lo yistak lefanecha kol chai. If Hashem wants to scrutinize the actions of a person without mercy, without rachamim, it will be very difficult to stand, right? Hashem sees everything, every thought, everything. And says the Mesillat Yesharim. V'chen amru rabotenu zikron rechad. This is a Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Hei Amud Bet. Umagid adam la'adam masecho. The pasuk in Amos, Perek Dalet, says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will tell you what your speech was. And the Gemara Darshan says this is afilu sicha kala sheben ish leishto magitim lo la'adam b'shat hadin. Even a regular conversation. Now what this is referring to really, even a simple bedroom conversation in Shat Hadin is going to be reviewed. Everything, the pasuk in Iyov says, "Lo tarfeni at bil'i roki." Even a time that takes to swallow your saliva, so to speak, everything is going to come to the heshbon of Hashem. It's a pretty scary thing when you think about it in that way. Of course, Hashem is the most compassionate, loving Father. But at the same time, that does not mean that because He loves, He's going to forgo everything. Right? Even the judgment is with rachamim and so on. But it's important to note that every single thing that you do for good also is like that. One little thought of good. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot Daf Vav, Chashav la'asod mitzvah. Let's focus on the good. V'neinas v'lo asa. You wanted to do a mitzvah badly, and you couldn't do it. You really wanted to come to Amud Yomi. Planned on it, put the clock and the alarm clock, and it didn't happen. You really wanted it, and it didn't happen. After Ma'av Esrim, you go up there. That day you went to Amud Yomi. But you didn't. But you wanted to. Ma'ale alav ha'katuv kilo asa. A person that has good intentions with a person that has no intentions, even though that they end up doing the same thing, very different. In the book of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every little thing counts. Every little thing counts. And we're going to give some examples of it. The Gemara in Yevamot says, Usvivav nis'ara me'od. There's a Gemara in Kuf Chaf Aleph, in page 121, in Masechet Yevamot, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu with tzaddikim who are close with him, medaktek HaKadosh Baruch Hu with tzaddikim kechut ha'sa'ara. Hashem is so careful with them, even like a hair. He's very, very specific with the tzaddikim. So Avraham was beloved to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is the nickname of Avraham in Sefer Yeshaya? What does Hashem call him? Right? What do people call Avraham? Huh? Avraham or Avi. He's the beloved one, right? In Arabic they say Avraham Habibullah. Huh? Khalilullah, right? A friend of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? He was beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's based on a pasuk in Yeshaya, right? Pasuk in Yeshaya in Perek Mem Aleph pasuk Chet says Avraham or Avi. Avraham is my friend. I love him. He doesn't say this about anybody else. Not even Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says, Lo palat minadin mipnei dvarim kalim shelo diktek bahem. Because of some small stuff that he was not careful in, the fact that he was beloved by Hashem so much, it didn't cause that to be just wavered out. Even those small things HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought to judgment. Even though that Hashem feels like he's partners with Avraham. Right? When he wants to destroy the 5 cities of Sodom, Amorah, Baos, Boim, and Zoar, Hashem says, can I possibly cover from Avraham what I decide to do in my world? It's not my world, it's our world, it's me and him. It's a mind-boggling statement. He wants to destroy something else somewhere else. He says, I have to discuss it with my partner. discuss it with Avraham Avinu. Can you imagine that level of closeness, that level of friendship, and yet Avraham doubts for one moment the promise of Hashem. He says, Bama eda, how do I know? Give me a sign. Bama eda ki rashena, how do I know that my children are going to inherit Eretz Canaan, Eretz Israel? Right? The current state of Israel, and bigger than that, is all promised to Abraham, and then afterwards it says, Et beriti akim et Yitzchak. He says, that covenant I will establish it with Yitzchak, your son, not with Ishmael. And then afterwards it was given to Yaakov again, promised several times. So Abraham asks Hashem, says, Bama eda ki rashena, how do I know? And Hashem says, what? I promised you. He says, Yado ateda ki ger yezaracha be'eretz lo lahem va'avadum ve'inu otam 400 shana. Because of that, 400 years of slavery of your children is going to be there, because you doubted. If me and you would ask, it would be but for his level, for Abraham's level, to doubt what HaKadosh Baruch Hu had promised him was out of line. For someone that's so close with Hashem, was out of line. And once you're out of line, it's going to be recorded. Despite all the love and care that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for Abraham, it's recorded. And it's going to be consequenced. Yado ateda ki ger yezaracha. V'ashkarat berit Avimelech comes to him. Right? Avimelech melech Pelishtim comes to him and he makes a brit with him. He says, Et sheva kvasot ele tikach miyadi. Take these 7 kvasot from me, the sheep. And they made a covenant. The Midrash says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu, this is in Bereshit Rabbah Perek Nun Dalet, says, Chayech, I swear, you do something like that without commandment, without the permission. She'ani mashe besimchat banecha shiv'a dorot. You won't be saved from Mitzrayim until 7 generations. You did 7 kivasot, 7 generations instead of that, right? Because from Avraham Avinu until Moshe Rabbeinu is 7 generations, right? Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then you have the Levi, Yishar, Kehat, and Moshe. So that the 7 generations you have Kehat, Amram, Moshe, right? That's 7 generations you have from Avraham Avinu until Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Midrash says the 7 was because he did something small, was out of line by a little bit. That's scary, right? At the same time, Yaakov ad shechara afo berachel. This is this week's parasha. Our parasha, Parashat Vayetze. Leah was not supposed to marry. Imagine, put yourself in the shoes of the story. Leah was not supposed to marry Yaakov, based on everyone's thoughts, right? The Gemara says in Baal Batra that Leah in Arakot, she was crying because she was supposed to be the chelik of Esav. But how HaKadosh Baruch Hu had it turned around was that Leah married him first, actually, and then they're married a week apart from each other, and now Leah is having children back to back, like less than a year apart, like as Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and at some point, Rachel says, "Havali banim, give me children. V'im lav meta anochi. If not, I'm like a dead person." This is difficult. She was broken. And how did Yaakov Avinu answer her? No, she asked in a way that was not proper necessarily. Right? So we give that to Yaakov Avinu. Rejected. The way she was asking was improper. But she was broken. She was hurt. And Yaakov Avinu says, he got angry with him. He got angry with her. And he tells her very strong words. He says, am I instead of God that stopped you from having children? I have children. You don't have children. So don't speak like that. But fine. So he was rejecting what she said. But Hashem says to him, he says, this is how you answer someone that's broken? Chayecha. I swear, Hashem said, your children, you said you have children? those children are going to stand in front of her child. They're going to meet her child. I read to you the language. Hashem says, you answer a person that's been hurting. Now, I actually want to share with you a chidush. I don't know if someone says this or not. For years, I've been every time I read this, I get excited. The words, you cannot miss the similarity of the words, are identical. Here, Yaakov Avinu Hashem does not bring the whole dialogue, but as I mentioned, Yaakov Avinu tells Yaakov berachel, I said, Hatachat Elohim ani? Am I instead of Hashem that you speak to me like that? Where else was that mentioned? Later on, you have Aidan one more time, when after years that Bnei Yaakov come to Egypt. In the beginning, you have the whole accusation of spies and so on, and then Yosef reveals his identity, his true identity to them, and they fall in front of, they bow to him, they apologize, and they profusely, all that, and Yosef is very humble. He cries and hugs them and so on, cares about, but the fear that they had and the feeling of subordination and being an absolute second class to him never ceased. For 17 years later, it did not. And when Yaakov Avinu died, 17 years later, they come again. They fall in front of him. They say, even though that was not true, they say your father said that he should be, forgiving us and so on. And Yosef says, don't worry. Ki atachat Elokim ani. So we simply translate. That means I'm not God. Hashem wanted this to happen. Hashem brought about this whole thing. But I think a deeper sense of that is, he says, don't worry. This that had to happen, that you should come and you should become subordinated and second class, and all this is because our father said to my mother, Hatachat Elokim ani, and this is the payback. When the Midrash says, Chayecha, Hashem swore that your children that you're proud of are going to stand in front of that child that she doesn't have yet. That was the fulfillment of that nevuah. Hatachat Elokim ani. It's a beautiful thing, scary at the same time. The boomerang of how you create reality. Every little detail. Even today Yaakov was correct, but it was insensitive. That's how you answer. It doesn't say you said wrong. It said, that's how you speak with someone that's broken, that's hurt. It's going to come back to you, Yaakov. Sit and watch how it's going to boomerang, and it's going to come back. This is mind-boggling. This is what you fall off your chair for this one. When finally, after 20 years, Yaakov is coming back, and is going to confront Esav HaRasha, his brother. What's the first thought that any father would have? Say Esav HaRasha, right? He's busy. He remembers him. They're twins. He remembers that from age 13, says Rashi. Right? Take a look at Rashi. That from age 13, he was busy with Gilui Arayot. This guy is a pedophile. He's busy with Shfichut Damim, Gilui Arayot. You have a beautiful daughter. You want to put her in front there? Right? You don't want to. So when they are meeting up, what he does is he puts Dinah in a box. The Esav should not see. You see the presentation of the sons of Yaakov. The next week's parasha, you see Dinah is missing. Chazal said, where was Dinah? And she was in a box. So you would think, all of us would think that that's a legitimate hishtadlut. I don't want him to see my daughter. Next thing is going to ask me to marry her. I don't want to give my daughter. If anyone here want to give their daughter to Esav? Have Esav as your hatan? Anyone here? Going once? Going twice? No. Nobody wants it. Imagine the greatest criminal a serial killer, a rapist. You want that to be your... He didn't want that. And says, look at what Chazal say. Well, Chazal understood that Dinah, with her personality, which was very much similar to Leah, who was the Batzug Abiti of Esav, may have been able to change the Esav. May. So he was admonished for this, and listen to this. This is hard to understand, hard to hear, but give your heart to understand the point in it. Say Chazal. He wanted to prevent that from happening. He meant good. He wanted good. He stopped a chesed that could have been there for his brother. Maybe Esav would have done tshuva because Dinah had that strong personality. Avleah. Amruba Midrash. The Midrash says in Perek Ayin Vav in the Shabbat. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says to Yaakov, oh, Lamas mereu chesed. It's pasuk in Iyov. You took away, you withheld chesed from your friend. Lo bikashta la'asiyah le'mahur. You don't want a mahur, someone that has brit milah, to marry her. You know what's going to happen? Harehi nisedra aril. She's going to get married with an aril, someone that doesn't even have brit milah. Meaning, even though that Shechem had brit milah afterwards, by the time that he got her, raped her, married her, so to speak, he was aril. Lo bikashta la'asiyah derech heter. You didn't want to do it with nisuin properly with heter. Harehi nised derech isur. She will be taken and raped by isur. Can you imagine that? Now this is of course way over our pay grade. The neshamot and shoresh of Rachel and Dinah, and you see actually she becomes the wife of the opponent of Esav. There's a lot of depth in there. A lot of depth that we're not going to even scratch the surface. But whatever it is, it's very nuanced, extremely nuanced. But by Yaakov Avinu, nuanced is important. Every little... Yaakov was beloved by Hashem. He's the Bechir Sheba Avod. It's the best of the Avod. And yet, every time he steps out of line, it's going to be consequenced. Yosef Rafisha Amar Lesar Mashkim. 2 weeks from now. Yosef HaTzadik has spent, this is Chilukei Midrashim, how many years he was when he was taken. It was 10 years, it was 2 years, 12 years. It's questionable. But according to Rashi, he's been in jail for 10 years. Right? Dungeon. And enough is enough. So now he has the opportunity of a lifetime. He just saved somebody that spends the best hours with the king. Why best hours? Because he's the one that sees when he's tipsy. Right? He's the butler. He has the butler of the king at his disposal. He just saved him. And he asks him twice. He asks him twice. I don't know. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought this whole thing to get Yosef out of there. Right? That's why it was interpretation of dreams. And then Paro had a dream. Right? But Yosef went out of his way, even though that he recognized that maybe Hashem is putting this for our salvation. The emunah that Yosef had with Hashem was a high level of emunah. And in his level, he was not expected to push limits and to try so hard. So he said twice he put his trust on Basar Vedam. Like Yirmiyah Navi says, Baruch HaGever, we say this in benching, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Hashem V'Haya Hashem Yiftacho. But the second part, that's also there in Yirmiyah, we don't say Arur HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Adam V'Sam Basar Zero. Cursed shall be a person that puts his trust and his hope to a person, to a Basar Vedam, to flesh and blood. And it takes from Hashem his trust. For Yosef HaTzadik, that was expected. And therefore, he says, Ki im zachartani itach. He says, please make sure you go out there, mention me to the king. And he says that twice. What happens to him?
2 more years in prison.
2 more years in the dungeon. 2 times, 2 years. Isn't that harsh? It's really, really harsh. For someone that's been there for 10 years, come on. But yes, exactly. For his level, he was expected to have more direct trust than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And doesn't matter who you are. The closer you are to Hashem, is more expected from you. When you have a very close friend that knows exactly what ticks you and what you're sensitive to, you don't expect them to betray you, even by the slightest. If they do, if they step out of the line, you expect more from them. Usvivav nis'ara me'od. But it shows you the depth of the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every action, every thought, every word counts, and it's recorded and it's accounted for. 2 years more. Like the Midrash says in Perishut Rabbah. Yosef atzmo al shechanat et aviv bli reshuto shel makom. Another thing Yosef did without permission. He allowed the body of Yaakov to be embalmed. The way they did it with the pharaohs and so on, that was considered a disrespect. Without doing it without permission. Or either because of that, or because it's Chilukei Deoti the Midrash, exactly what the reason was. Because 10 times, when the process of going and coming with the brothers before he revealed his real identity to them, when he was accusing them of being spies, every time that they talk to him about their father, they say, Avdecha Avinu, your servant, our father. And that was considered disrespect. For him to hear your servant, lo yafeh, lo na'im. It's lo kibud havayim. It's not kibud havayim. 10 times he heard that and he didn't say anything. Says the Midrash, Avdecha Avinu, the shatak, and he was quiet and object to it. The more kedeit lo more kedeit. It's a machloket again in the Midrashic works. Met lifnei achav. He was the youngest to die. Out of all the 12 Shvatim, even though that he was one of the youngest ones, besides from Binyamin, he died first. He was the youngest to die. And that was punishment. Now, those who say the second one, they say he was supposed to be like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's 120 years he was supposed to live. And for every time that he said that, 1 year was taken away from him. Right? Now Yaakov Avinu himself, when he comes in front of Pharaoh, and Paro asks him, says, "Oh, kama yemesh shenei chayecha? How old are you?" And he says, "Yemesh shenei chayai me'at v'ra'im." He says, my years has been very, very small, very, very, very difficult, right? It hasn't reached the years of my things. My father's in quality, in quantity, he complained, basically. How many words of complaint? With the question of Paro, 33. All the Avot were supposed to live 180 years. Right? So different talk, why exactly that number, right? Because we find by Avraham Avinu, Hashem took him 5 years earlier because of Ishmael going off the path and so on. So 5 years earlier, Yitzchak Avinu lived a full 180, and Yaakov Avinu lived 147. Where did the 33 go? Say Chazal, you complained. You said your life was short and bad. Okay. Let's see. These are brutal words of the Midrash. Brutal. But it's true. Because the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is on every thought, every action, everything that the person does is accounted for. And that's everything that a person does. Some of these things are towards the goyim. It doesn't matter, Jew, not Jew. It's a sensitivity of a person and the actions, the way it should be. David, this is another mind-boggling one. The pasuk says in Tehillim, in the famous long perek of Kuf Yutet, Nundalet maybe, it says, Zemirod hayu li chukecha bebet megura. Hashem, your commandments for me are like a sing-a-song. It's like now he said it in a good way. He said it in a positive way. So I love them so much. It's like Zemirod, I know them. Amazing, right? Hashem said, what? Ne'enash. Hashem said, you call my mitzvot, that about the Torah, the pasuk says, Rechava mini yam. Aruka me'eres midah urchava mini yam is longer, more vast than the earth, deeper than the sea. And you say zemirot hayolich ukecha as if it's a sing-a-song. You know them all. You know them as a song. Let's see. I'll make you make a mistake in such a simple thing that even little kindergarten kids know it. And it will be a public embarrassment. But Var Uza, everybody knows that the Aron of Hashem, right, the Ark of the Covenant, you cannot carry it on a carriage. You have to carry it. Bakatef Yisau, it says a pasuk in the Chumash. A kindergarten person is a 5-year-old, Ben Chamesh Lemikra. They know it. 5-year-olds start learning Chumash, and they know Bakatef Yisau. They start from Vayikra. That's one of the first things they learn. And David HaMelech made an error, a massive error, of having the Aron carried by Agalah Chalasha. And we all know Uzzah died. It was Peres Uzzah. It was a whole very difficult thing that happened, right? When it's Arva Simchato, his Simcha was messed up because of it, right? This is again, Gemara Mesillat Sotah Daf Lamed Chet. Michal, the wife of David HaMelech, the daughter of Shaul HaMelech, right? She once spoke in a derogatory way, teasing David HaMelech on something he did. Now, there was a very big difference between David and Shaul. Shaul was a very proper person, very tzanua, but very proper. David HaMelech did not care about his kavod. When it came to the kavod of Hashem, he couldn't care less. He was a servant, a completely dedicated servant to Hashem. So, when after this whole story of Uzzah, they finally brought the Aron to Yerushalayim, David HaMelech mecharcher b'chol oz lifnei Hashem. He was dancing, jumping with all of his might. And he took off his garment as a king, and he wore b'gdei pishtan, regular, pashut, white clothing, not a kingly garment at all. And he was leading the dancing. Can you imagine that? Not very kingly, right? But he brought his kavod down in order to bring Hashem's kavod up, right? Sometimes people bring other people down to bring themselves up, right? And he was dancing non-stop, jumping, and his legs were showing a little bit. And that's not, And Michal, when they came close, she's standing in the balcony of the palace. She's seeing all this, how David HaMelech is jumping, and his feet are showing, his part of his legs are showing, and she didn't like that because Shaul would never do that. Very tzanua, very this. So when he came after he blessed the nation and everything, he comes up to the palace. He comes home. And she rhetorically, in a condescending way, very teasingly, she says, "Oh, what an amazing day today, Beigalot!" In the way that the Melech Yisrael, the King of Israel, in front of the maidservants is showing his feet, and his kavod is diluted like that. And David HaMelech did not take it well. Tzadok was sure of what he was doing, and he was doing the right thing. He said, "Look, that's the difference between me and your father. I don't care about my kavod when it comes to Hashem's kavod. If I could make myself more low, I would have done it. I would bring myself even lower than that, if I could. And that's why Hashem chose me over your father." Those are strong words, he said. And Michal was punished for the disrespect to the king in that way, even though that she had a point. There was the difference of her upbringing with her husband's upbringing, or her father and her husband. Fine. But the way she spoke to him, right after that, the pasuk says in Shmuel Bet, Perek Vav, it says that Michal did not have a child until the day of her death. Okay. It's big stuff. It's omek hadin, when a person contemplates the judgment that every single thing that you say counts. Insensitivity, hurting people's feelings. This is not a mitzvah or avera. It's like a husband and wife. So insensitive. You hurt your wife. You hurt your husband. You tease them in a very hurting way. You think that's lost 5 minutes later because he smiles at you or she smiles at you and she forgave you, that's gone? It's recorded. And it's a boomerang. Whatever goes around comes around. Everything that you do creates a reality. And we see it again time and again and again. We could go for hours and hours going through Tanakh. The examples that are there, right? Yehuda. It doesn't bring this. Yehuda. This is parasha again. Right? Well, really, this is next parasha. Yehuda says he's the one that leads the decision, the final decision of selling Yosef. Now, he was a tzaddik because Reuben and Shimon wanted to kill him, wanted to behead him. He was rodef, and all the brothers agreed that he was a rodef. For right or for wrong. Later on, 22 years later, they regretted that. Right? And that's the beauty of the Shvatim. It's a whole story by itself. But Yehuda was the one that said, why should we kill him? Let's sell him. We'll just send him away. As long as he's not here, he's not damaging us. He's not slandering us. Yosef was slandering them to the father. It's not good. They're worried that's going to become like Esav and Yaakov. And they're going to lose Olam Haba. They were wrong. But that was what was apparent to them. And he was the one that actually led the whole the cover story, to bring the Ketoret Pasim, dip it in the blood, and go to the father. And he takes this, presents it to Yaakov, and says, what are the words? Anyone remembers? Hakerna, please recognize, Haktonet bincha hiolo. Where else in Chumash do we have Hakerna? This is again one of my things. I'm not sure if anyone says this in the Mefashim. I'm sure they will, because it's such a glaring thing. There's one more time in Chumash that's mentioned. You turn the page, and it's the story of Yehuda. Yehuda had married Isha Ulamir, right? Has 3 sons, right? The first one got married to Tamar, died. The second one died. Tamar was, Almana, sitting there. Tamar dresses up, right? Pretends as a Isha Zora, and there's a whole relationship there without Yehuda knowing who this person is. She asked for Chotemet and Petilim and Mateh, for signs, as his staff and his stamp, and all of his personal signs. And she takes it and she runs. And he doesn't know anything. And then comes the day 3 months later, and people come to Yehuda and say, well, your Kala, Tamar, who's not married to anyone yet, she's waiting to get married to Shelah, the 3rd son, as a Yibum, is pregnant. Right? Means that she did something wrong, which would be punishable for Bat Kohen, would be punishable by Serefah. So Yehuda says, a public punishment. The whole town is there. The whole town is there. Can you imagine? Put yourselves in those shoes. And she sends, in the midst of all this, she sends the closed, sealed Amazon box, right, to Yehuda, right, with a note inside. It says, Lemi she'el lo anochi hara. Says, I'm pregnant from the person that owns these things. Now he has a difficult situation, right? And the words that she uses is those words, those faithful words. Hakerna, please recognize. Lemi achotemet va'petelim va'mateh ha'ele. Who's the owner of these things? He hurt his father with those words of Hakerna. Can you imagine the hurt of he had to come out, and he did, all the kavod to him and all the credit to him, and he became the king of Israel forever. Lo yasur shevet miYehuda, because of this. Ata odita. He admitted tremendous personality, character, strength of character. But the pain, can you imagine the embarrassment and pain that he had to go through? You put your father through pain. Even though that he had a bet din, HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed with them, the 10th person that fashioned didn't tell Yaakov that this happened. The whole story behind this. It's not that he was a Rasha Merusha. No, they had a bet din, they passed it. But you hurt your father? Those same words are going to be boomerang and come back to you. Because there's nothing that gets lost in the world. Nothing. Not a thought, not a word, not an action. Good for good, and chas v'shalom negative for negative. And that's really the power of this. We're still in the middle, in Perek HaKol Chayavim, in Sif Katan Wav in my Mesillat Yesharim over here, but Be'ezrat Hashem, we will be continuing this in the days to come. Hazak Baruch. Thank you.